Hello and welcome back to another gait analysis video. And today we have Jane, and Jane is not her real name, and I was too lazy to come up with anything more creative. So thank you, Jane, for sending in your video. However, Jane has expressed she does not want her face to be shown, so we get another fun challenge of not looking at her front view. As per usual, I have not looked at her walking video yet, so I'm about as clueless as you are as to what we're going to see. However, I did take these screenshots of her standing posture. Another challenge we're going to have with this video is that Jane's camera person is slightly off center. And I could have messaged her back and said, hey, could you film the video again, making sure the cameraman's at, or camera woman, whoever, is at 12 o'clock or 6 o'clock right behind you. But I was like, you know what, this could be a fun challenge. Because life isn't perfect. So we'll see what kind of information we can get. Let's observe Jane's resting posture from the back view / the 5 o'clock view. Now, the first thing that stands out to me is her left scapula, which looks a little elevated, and it's really tough to say from this angle if it's a bit more protracted. But I'm going to maybe wager a bet that her left scap is a little more protracted, meaning that that border that we see is a little more peeled away from the rib cage. Generally, her spine looks quite flat. I don't know her activity history, but I want to guess Jane might be in some kind of dance, has a dance background. I don't know, but I often see that with dancers, gymnasts, etc. Flat spines. Looking at her feet, again, we don't have a super great view of her Achilles tendons or her rear foot, her heels. We can't really tell if one foot's pointed out more than the other, so I'm not going to speculate on anything there. I'm really not going to try to speculate on anything there. I am drawn mostly to that left scapula and her spine being very flat. And we're going to leave it there because that's really all I can say with any kind of certainty. So let's go to, here we go, side view. Side view looks like a little more from the side, but again, I think we're seeing a bit of an oblique view. So we just have to bear that in mind. What do we want to say about this? Let's look at the other side view before we say anything about that. It's really hard to say anything. What we can get a sense of about her spinal posture, though, is just how extended she is through her spine and how flexed her neck is. And by flexed, you see how there's not a lot of lordosis in her neck. So it's pretty flat, like her whole spine is just really flat. And that can come with years of training to be that way. So I wonder if there is a background here of someone who's really trained for good posture from whatever paradigm good posture came from. Can't say much about rotation. Can't say too much about frontal plane. Although I kind of want to guess that there's a bit of a left lateral flexion through her lumbar spine and a bit of a hike on the left side of her pelvis. I'm really curious about what we're going to be able to see from this view as she walks. So rather than agonize, let's take a look. So because we don't want any front view of Jane's face, let's just watch her walking away from the camera at full speed and see what we see. Oh, well, that is interesting. Oh, love that head swoosh. Totally a dancer. So look at her arm swing. Isn't that just the jolliest arm swing? But that left scapula definitely looks retracted, or protracted rather. It doesn't seem to retract, and there's a whole lot of bounciness in her arms. And I think we are seeing, we go back last time, I think we are seeing in her spine some interesting stuff in the lateral flexions. Okay, I want to do that one more time because there's also some interesting rotation happening in her spine. Yeah, I'm really interested in the left lateral flexion and left rotation quality in her spine. And is that just her about to do a head whip? I think it was. I don't think it was actually her head being stuck high on the right-hand side. I think that was just the head whip. Okay, well, let's watch this in slower motion. I'm going to guess that we're going to see some interesting lateral flexion and rotation spine stuff. But it's all just going to be a guess, really. We're going to probably have some obstructed views of her feet and things. So let's go into a right heel strike to begin. Oh, interesting spine. So already what I want to say here, right off the bat, this could be a big thing for Jane, is just how behind her head, her pelvis is staying. So in this mid stance position here, where her feet are next to each other, there is quite a bit of extension in her lumbar spine and quite a bit of a pitched forward torso posture. And what that's making me question is how well she can extend both of her hips. She hasn't listed anything about her hips in her complaints list that I'm reading right now, but she does say she has a bit of a right-sided lower back twinge. So interesting. So right away, Jane, I want to know, how does it feel if you do like a hip flexor stretch? Do you feel like you have persistently stiff hips that stretching doesn't really do anything about? Just curious about that, but let's move her along, see how this leg swings through. There's not a lot of rotation in her tibia. I think that's always fun to look at when we look at a swing through, early swing. Could be the angle, but there's not a lot of rotation in her tibia. We'll compare with the other side if possible. And okay, here is our right heel strike. Just watching. Watch her spine as she goes through early swing, through late swing, into heel strike. Now, it could be the camera, it could be the angle, but I see a little bit of a interesting S shape in her spine. Whether or not she's been diagnosed with scoliosis, a lot of people do, when they walk, exhibit a little bit of a squiggly spine shape like we have here. So what I'm seeing is a pelvis that might be still hiked on the left, giving us a bit of a left lateral flexion in the lumbars. But then we see there's a bit of a drop in the right shoulder girdle, giving us the sense of a right lateral flexion in the thoracic spine. Looking at her shoulder blades here as she goes, because there was quite a bit of movement in her arms and her shoulder blades, wasn't there, when she was walking full speed? So in this phase where we have the right heel striking, we actually would like a flat pelvis with a slightly left lateral flexing spine, not a squiggle. So we'd actually want this right shoulder blade to be higher and the left one lower, which means we'd actually want this left shoulder blade to be upwardly rotating and the left shoulder blade to be downwardly rotating. Does her left shoulder blade upwardly rotate? I don't know from this angle, to be honest. Her right shoulder blade, however, I get the sense is upwardly rotating. If you watch the tip of it here, it looks like it upwardly rotates and her arm starts to swing away from her body, an abduction. So like a side arm swing. Whoop. So her shoulder blade is going upwardly rotated, and that will go with an arm that's swinging sideways, abducting. That's kind of interesting. Now, in her history, she did note a lot of things about her left shoulder. She has a left clavicle that's weird, left acromion, scapular pain, uncomfortable left shoulder when she does things like push-ups or hanging. That's interesting. I wonder what that arm swing to the side is about. Now, bear in mind, if we have a lateral flexion to the right in her thoracic spine, that should give us an upwardly rotating scap and an abducting arm. However, we don't want to see that particular thing happening in a right heel strike. That's actually more like what we want to see coming up in the next phase. So she's a little bit wonky in the timing of how this is happening. So let's see what happens next. Let's go into a pronated foot. Oh, just one more thing to note. When her leg swings through, when anyone's leg swings through, we'd like to see some flexion in the lumbar spine and a posterior tilt in the pelvis. So if this is the front, we'd want to see a pelvis like that, the leg swinging forward, and we have this flexion in the spine. The worst diagram I've ever seen in my life. So she's missing some lumbar flexion. Lumbar flexion will decompress her spine, which she might be in need of. And this left lateral flexion is actually putting some length to this right side of her spine, which is where she says she has some twinges. So whether the twinge is because of one, there's just some compression, it looks like, generally in her lumbars, bilaterally with that extended spine. She might also be noticing, in particular on the right side, because it's getting pulled long with that left lumbar lateral flexion. As always, I'm just guessing. We're going to have to see how she goes. She looks quite stiff going into this phase. I don't know why. She just looks stiff. All right, let's see when her foot lands on the ground. Right foot pronation. I'm going to say right about there. So we're seeing a little bit of a hike come into her pelvis on the right. Fantastic. However, her spine looks quite straight. She still has a bit of that lateral flexion to the right in her thoracics, but her lumbars look quite straight compared to when we were here left lateral flexion. She just looks, oh, interesting. It almost looks like instead of really dropping into her right hip, like she hikes, but she doesn't drop into it, does she? I always like to think about this phase, which we call suspension in the flow motion model. It's like a heavy phase. It's like a shock absorption phase where you just kind of drop into your joints. So the hike we want to see isn't a hike up with the pelvis. Well, it is, but it's a result of dropping down into the hip structures. And it almost looks like she's not dropping down, she's lifting up with her body somehow, just giving it this air of a lack of bounciness, lack of buoyancy. So I wonder if there's anything funky with that hip, that she's not able to flex it or adduct it in a effective way, because it kind of looks like maybe I'm just really sucked into a detail here, as I tend to do, but it almost looks like instead of dropping into her right hip, she almost like right there, she pushes off her back foot quite a bit, and it looks like her body kind of projects forward through more of the torso, like a rocket ship, than sinking into her hip. That's a general impression I have, totally not scientific biomechanical language. Okay, but she does have a pretty reasonable, compared to last videos we looked at, a pretty reasonable back foot. We'd want to see her first and fifth metatarsals down a little more on the ground. Moving into right mid stance transition. I think there's a lot more tibial external rotation we're seeing than on the other leg. This thing, it looks more rotated out. Super envious, by the way, that you're walking barefoot on a hard ground. I'm like, just can't wait for the day that I can actually do that soon. So what do we see here? I see an interesting right arm. Again, that wants to float away from her body. We're starting to see her spine rotate to the left, which is good. Spine rotation to the left, we should see at this particular moment in time as her left leg is making its journey forward. We want the spine always rotating towards the leg that's swinging forward, in which case this is the left leg, so left spine rotation is good. But there's just something a little funny about it with that right arm. Almost like she's throwing her shoulder forward. It's a little bit too much, I would say. But again, like everyone's so unique. I think we all have the same kind of general skeleton, but how we use it, we probably all have our own gait fingerprint. So I don't know, this might be her normal way of swinging her arms. Who am I to say that's not appropriate? But we need to compare it to the other side to really know what's going on. So anyway, she's swinging her leg through, her arms swinging out to the side for some reason. Her spine is straight, pelvis is pretty level. That's great. Did her right foot supinate, which it should be doing. And no. Loads of rotation in the spine. So let's see if we can get a clear shot of her left heel strike. Oh, we're not going to get it there. We might have to actually back it up to her previous footstep, which maybe won't make it as consistent, but let's just see if the same thing kind of happens here. Yeah, we're still getting that swing with the shoulder forward. We're still seeing some external rotation in that tibia. And we're seeing a really, I want to say, a rotation to the left that stands out. We're still seeing a pelvis behind, posterior to her head. So if I were to draw a little image of that, pelvis, legs swinging forward. That's going to be the worst drawing ever. There's your head. Shameful. But what I want you to get is, here's her head. Just a different color. Here's her head. Here's her pelvis. We would want them to be like that, stacked up a bit more. Okay. So I wouldn't be surprised if she had some, like, tight feeling hamstrings and a tight feeling lower back generally. Okay, where were we? We were rolling her through. Her right side heel is rising, left leg is getting into a heel strike. Right there. Interestingly, it's hard to tell, but it kind of looks like we do see this shoulder going higher for the first time than her left shoulder. What is her left shoulder blade doing there? Because that's where she's having her issues. So what we should be seeing here, I'm just really interested in that left shoulder blade, which does not seem to be doing as much as her right one. Bear with me while I wrap words around this. That left shoulder blade doesn't really change positions, does it? If I were to choose a name for how it's resting on her, I would say it's resting in a downward rotation. So downward rotation, here's my art skills again. Let's say this is your rib cage. This is your left scapula, triangle shaped thing. And this bottom tip here is kind of going that general direction, or this part here, you could say. Whoops, come on, zoom me back in. It's going this, let's reference this part here up at where the AC joint-ish area is. It's going down. And then if we had a scapula that was oriented more like this, oh, that was not really that clear either. Like this. So this outside part where the clavicle meets the scapula at the tip is going up. We call that an upwards rotation. It looks like Jane's left scapula is stuck in a downward rotation and it just doesn't really move. And you can kind of see how her arm stays really close to her body. So it's more adducted on the left. Glenohumeral joint more adducted. Scap more downwardly rotated. That's how I'm seeing it. I am happy for someone to clarify that for me. Whereas, do you see this right scap? It swings forward quite a bit, so it almost looks like it's protracting. But I do get the sense that it's upwardly rotating, and also based on how much her right arm swings away or abducts from her body. So why is that scapula stuck, not moving? I wonder if there is anything in her history that would make that the case. Anything happen to that left shoulder? Anything else we want to say about this, other than that her spine isn't really side bending to the right like we want it to? She still looks like there's like a teeny bit of a left side bend in her spine. So I don't know if she can laterally flex her lumbars to the right. Don't know. In order to laterally flex her lumbars to the right, I don't want to make too many assumptions or stories up. But let's say you have a spine that can laterally flex to the right. You'd actually see on the right-hand side a scapula that does an upward rotation and a scapula on the left doing a downward rotation. Which would cause this arm to be more close to her body and this arm to be a bit more swing away from her body. But what if this left scapula is it's not moving, it's stuck downwardly rotated. So that might be impacting on how her spine is moving. Depending on the sequence of events in her history, there might have been something that happened with her actual spine or hip that's creating that lack of lumbar lateral flexion to the right. And for some reason, that's feeding its way up into her shoulder. I'm not really sure the direction, but I can see a connection there and it's intriguing. Okay, so let's stop speculating on her heel strike. Note that she still does not flex at all in her spine whatsoever. Welcome to my life. You and me, Jane, we're in the Can't Flex Your Spine Club. She does extend quite a lot through her spine when she gets onto her left leg, though. Do you see that? Just watch the quality of the tissue tone change when she gets onto her left foot. It really, right there, really accentuates. So this is telling me there's not a whole lot of movement in her hips, probably. She might have trouble flexing both of her hips. And instead, a lot of the motion we're getting is this lumbar extension. We want this front hip to be flexing, and that would give her some glutes that would get to load and absorb the shock of that footstep. But I don't know if that's happening so much. Wouldn't be surprised about a grumpy lower back based on what we're seeing here. She does appear to get some hike on the left in the pelvis and that left lateral flexion in her lumbars. We can see, again, she is actually getting that right shoulder girdle to go higher than the left one, and her spine is all going the same direction. That's one thing that was kind of different about her left heel strike as opposed to her right heel strike. Do you see how her spine looks to be all side bending in one direction? Whereas when she went into her right heel strike, I think that was her very first step, so we need to take her another step through to get accurate. Yeah, you see how we get this kind of squiggle in her spine, and it might be just a lot of rotation to the right also in her spine. It looks like right here in her right heel strike, we have too much right lateral flexion and a lot of rotation to the right, a lot of arm abduction. Arm abduction on the right. There we go. So there is that squiggly shape. And we have to go back in time to see it on the left, a clear view of her leg. You see how her spine's a lot more straight. There's less of that side bend and rotation to the left. Neither is really what you want, but it's interesting how different they are and how we can correlate that with potentially causing some discomfort there. And if a scapula, oh my gosh, one back. If a scapula doesn't move and the arm's stuck pinned to her side all the time, it makes sense that that arm wouldn't want to do any pressing or any hanging or overhead positions, because to get her arm to go up overhead, we would need her scapula to go like this, which would bring her arm up. But her scapula seems to be stuck down like that, so her arm really isn't going to be comfortably able to lift overhead. It's just going to pin it down. Okay. What else can we look at? We can look at her going into her, she did her pronation, noticed her back was getting a bit excessively extended. So this is interesting here because we can see her spine does side bend to the left a little bit, but her arm is still pinned by her side. Remember, when we have a left lateral flexion in the spine, that scapula should start to upwardly rotate and the arm should dangle away from the body and abduct. So we're seeing an arm on the left that can't abduct and a scapula that can't upwardly rotate. What that'll do is it'll create a bit of shortness here in those lower traps and rhomboid kind of area. It'll just be stuck a little gunky there, and it might be overstretching at the top there through the traps and the more upper rhomboid area. So we should have that in green, stretching there a bit too much. Also some stretching across that top part of the shoulder a little bit. So there might be some tension-based stuff going on in the green. So we really need to ask Jane's body, what happened with that left shoulder? Is it stuck to her side like that because something happened to it and it's trying to stay safe and not move so it doesn't experience any other movement-based accidents again, like a protection? Or did something happen with her back or hips or lower where she's keeping that stuck to her body? I'm not sure the answer. I'm super curious to hear about Jane's injury history. Again, we're seeing that pelvis behind head, like where we started. Okay, so I think I just want to leave it there. And love how bouncy your arms are. But there's a really nice view of that. So that's a great view of this spine that it's straight there. Oh, this is good. You can see more of her spine. Yeah, we can see that kind of squiggly thing happening in her back here, where she has the hike on the left side of the pelvis. A hike on the left will give you a lumbar lateral flexion towards the hike. Then her spine corrects and goes to the right. Straight spine, then we'd like to see it more or less flexing to the right. Still no real lateral flexion to the right, but look when she brings her. Oh, that's interesting. Look at what her right shoulder does there. That just really stands out. It's like using that arm to really move her body forward. So I'm curious too if anything maybe happened to this left leg. It is a bit more externally rotated, which sometimes can indicate an adaptation after a sprain or something. How did her right leg swing through? I get the sense, even though it's an awkward angle, I get the sense that this is less externally rotated than this left side, more external rotation in that tibia. So she might be, just to speculate on strategy, because that's what gait really gives us a good impression of. It doesn't really tell us what the thing is that's wrong, but it gives us an idea of the strategy for forwards movement. This left leg isn't really I don't know, a happy leg to stand on. Weight doesn't want to go there. We might need to use a bit more of a swing in that arm to swing the leg through. Yeah. And that right there just stands out to be the moment where her back most gets jarred. She has the most flexion to the left with her lumbars, the most extension in her spine there. So we might, that right-sided low back stuff, it might be happening here. So that would be something I'd like to maybe hear, Jane, is when in your walking cycle, or if you notice your lower back twinging in your walking cycle at all, if you could pinpoint a moment, is it when you step onto your left foot? Because it seems to be like that's where, like, look at all that spine motion there. That's beautiful. And then look how quickly that arm swings back on the right-hand side. Like, the moment she gets her foot down, it's like the arm is trying to propel her forward. Curious. Okay, I got to stop now because I kind of have to go to the toilet. So, Jane, please fill us in about if anything happened to your left shoulder or maybe left leg. That's worth noting. Do you have any, like, who knows? Sometimes it's the arm that is moving the most, had the most problems. I've seen it go either way. So there really is, it's just a 50-50 guess at this point for me. And I think there are other questions I asked throughout this video that I've now forgotten. So make notes as you watch this, Jane, and then please reply back with your observations, comments, feedback, experience. And everyone else who happens to be watching this, also, please would love your help, observations, and your input as well, so we can all learn. And in particular, because the angle of this was so interesting, I would love to hear if you saw some stuff that was same or different from me and bring some clarity. As always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another gait video.